Welcome to another exciting episode of American Warrior Radio, coming to you since 2009. If you or someone you know has ever worn the uniform of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, or National Guard or Reserves, you've come to the right place, American Warrior Radio. We're always efforting to bring you news, notes, interviews, and current events for all things military and veteran related. The bumper music for American Warrior Radio is provided by none other than combat veteran and mill hop artist Stephen Hobbs. Thank you, Stephen. With that said, let's kick the tires and light the fires and get this episode off the ground. I want to remind you that AVET Project must raise funds for our PR&R retreats for active duty and veterans. PR&R, Project Recuperation and Reintegration Retreats. It changes lives. Help us help them, and help yourself to a chance at winning this Kel-Tec KSG 410 shotgun. You've seen Kel-Tec in the movies, John Wick, Hawaii Five-0, all over. Go to the website, avet-project.org. Drawing is to be held on Patriot Day 2024. That's 9/11/2024. Until next time, don't forget, thank a vet. Hi, everybody. Garen Cohn with American Warrior Radio Show. We are back with our special guest, Ben, otherwise known as Doc Askins. You saw the last episode. We're going to continue on here for a moment. Keep in mind, he is an expert in what he's talking about. Doc, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
You finished up speaking about that one episode, the first exposure you had watching this video about this soldier, and that different things were bubbling up as he went through this process. Can you just kind of reform that and take us through to what the end result was?
Yeah, absolutely. We essentially, I was telling a story about watching a video in the MDMA-assisted therapy training where a particular soldier was able to engage with a traumatic memory in a way that promoted lasting healing. And the details of his story, I don't know beyond watching the video. However, the outcomes in the clinical trials are unparalleled in the history of psychiatry. We have people who are enrolled in this phase 3 clinical trial for MDMA-assisted therapy with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, who they have the highest rating scales of PTSD. These are some of the people who are suffering the worst you could possibly imagine from the accumulations of trauma that they've had over a lifetime. And, just maxing out the charts with respect to the suffering, that as much as you can measure that sort of thing. And 2/3 of the people in the clinical trials, after this 2 to 3 months of MDMA-assisted therapy, no longer met the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. We call it remission in medicine because we're not allowed to say the word cure, because who knows how long it'll last for, right? But they also monitored these people for upwards of a year afterward, and those same 2/3 of people were still in remission after a year. So this isn't taking MDMA every day like an SSRI or a typical antidepressant. This isn't a regular thing that you do frequently. It's an intensive course of therapy, but it's comparatively brief in the lifespan of a person and can completely change the trajectory of their lives in a way that we've just never seen before. What they like to say in the literature is that the way that the microscope changed biology and the way the telescope changed astronomy, psychedelics are going to change psychology. We're going to get insights into what it is to be a person and to heal in a way that we've never really had access to in the United States for a very long time.
And this is using a drug that currently is Schedule 1, an illicit drug. You mentioned
Correct.
something while we were off air about the progression of getting this more into the mainstream. Tell us about that and the law and whatever.
Yeah, we live in this crazy, weird in-between period right now where, I have a certificate that says I can do this therapy with a medicine that it's not legal for me to write a prescription for yet. But they've made the application to the FDA to get the medicine rescheduled. And the hope is by the end of 2024 that it will be possible to write prescriptions for MDMA-assisted therapy. They're already doing this in Australia. The first prescriptions were written.
Therapy, not a bottle of Molly to take home.
Correct. Yes. It would be administered in a clinical setting under the supervision of prescribers and closely monitored. You have a co-therapy dyad that works with somebody. This isn't, you're just going to take Molly and go to a rave or something like that. It's not, it's the difference between like, amateur ping pong and professional tennis is the difference between raving and getting psychedelic assisted therapy for, a particular level of suffering in mental health, right?
And you mentioned that the candidates for these types of programs, and maybe you can speak to this on your own professional practice. How do you go about selecting somebody that's profoundly disabled from the anxiety disorders or such?
Well, and that's the thing. They were looking for people who had a lot of difficulty for the clinical trials. That doesn't necessarily mean that when we roll this out to society at large, that you necessarily have to have complex treatment-resistant PTSD or that level of suffering. It'll be at the judgment of a clinician, just like myself, who's got, the ability to diagnose and treat medical diseases of different kinds. So it's not necessarily that's the example, right? The argument from the greater to the lesser is that if it worked for people who are suffering this much, this could work for any level of suffering that's out there, right? And it was just in December.
Some civilian that had witnessed a train crash or an airplane crash. Anybody that has that type of an anxiety disorder, like a PTSD, could be helped by this.
Exactly. And the thing that they're looking at studying next actually is couples therapy, because back in the 60s and 70s, before the drug was rescheduled to be a Schedule I medicine, they were using it for couples therapy because of the level of connection that naturally occurs. Like I said on a podcast last April, I think that MDMA-assisted therapy should be something that's available to soldiers on redeployment. You go on a deployment, you come back, and you should be able to reconnect with your family in this way, because the suffering doesn't just, affect whoever's wearing the uniform, right? There's ripple effects, second and third order effects. I just made a post on LinkedIn today about like the way that my wife suffered while I was in Iraq. That's like an excerpt from my book, like the things that, like she's the real American hero. I'm just a jackass wearing a uniform, doing whatever the guy in charge tells me to do.
Get the idea, right? Folks. He's very modest. You wrote a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wrote a book called The Anti-Hero's Journey, The Zero with 1,000 Faces. And the idea is right now, psychedelics are basically illegal all over the United States, with the exception of ketamine-assisted therapy, which we could go into later. But, everybody's curious about it. And I decided to write a book. It's telling my life story as if it were a psychedelic assisted therapy session, because a book's not illegal. And a book isn't, like if you were to take a psychedelic medicine and have a bad time, you don't have a choice. You took the medicine and you're going to ride the ride until the ride's over. But if you don't like the book, you can just throw it in the corner and you can move on with your life, right? Like if the book turns into a bad trip, just use it as a coaster or something, right? Like, you got options, right? Start to get nauseous, or you start to tear up a little bit. You can just chuck that thing, right? The book in print is only available from Amazon because I self-published it. And then if you want the audiobook or the ebook, you can get that directly from my website, antiheroesjourney.com. And if you use the discount code all caps FRIEND10, you can get 10% off from my website.
Sweet. Very good. Okay, everybody, we're talking to Ben Doc Askins. He's got so much experience and so much to say, and not just experience on a general level and through all his educational pursuits, but he's been there. He's been there in the mess that a lot of you combat vets have been in as well. He's given you some of this cutting edge therapy, I guess we can call it, pharmaceutical assisted therapy. If somebody is watching this episode and they're like, wow, maybe their wife is watching it, because you mentioned, doesn't PTSD, if we're just talking about that, it doesn't just affect the soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine. It affects everybody in their circle, whether it's the spouse and children, maybe their parents, maybe people they go to church with or work with. Like you said, the ripple effect is huge. So if, let's say, a spouse is watching this and go, my husband needs this, how do they go about doing something like this?
Yeah, so the only thing that's available now is what's called ketamine-assisted therapy, and it just varies from place to place whether it's being provided or not. I knew there were a few VA centers that were doing them on and off. I don't know the details of any of those locations, but that would be the first thing to do is a Google search for ketamine-assisted therapy in your area if you're interested in this particular way of doing therapy. In my practice in Louisville, Kentucky, you can look me up. I'm on advancedpracticeproviders.com. And I do the therapy in a way that resembles MAPS approach to MDMA assisted therapy. But because I can't use MDMA or psilocybin or any of the other psychedelics that are illegal, we use ketamine assisted therapy. And ketamine is an FDA approved anesthetic. At high doses, you go to sleep and we take out your appendix and you don't notice. At low doses, it can address pain. Combat medics and corpsmen will be familiar with it because it's the darling point of wounding to use as either pain management or anesthesia. If you break a bone and you're whining a whole lot and I want you to be quieter, I give you a little bit of ketamine. And then if you keep whining, I give you a lot more ketamine until you go to sleep because I'm sick of hearing you or whatever, right? But there's
ketamine can be incorporated into this treatment protocol regimen.
There's enough evidence at this point published around using what are called sub-anesthetic doses of ketamine that create this non-ordinary state of consciousness that is fruitful for therapy. There are places where they will just give ketamine in like a prescription way where you show up for your appointment, you get a ketamine injection or infusion, and then you go about your merry way and the medicine does whatever it does. And there's a lot of good things that happen in someone's brain just from exposure to the medicine. But in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of professionals at this point, it's therapy first, therapy throughout, therapy last, and that we augment therapy with these psychedelic medicines. The medicines themselves are just amplifiers. You can turn something up or turn something down. You can have a really great time or a really terrible time if you're just taking a medicine like this. But what's beneficial and what the studies have suggested at this point is that, combining it with therapy is the way forward, right? So one of the tools in the tool belt that I use in my practice with my collaborating physicians is ketamine assisted therapy. So that would be the long and the short on that.
I'm just amazed that there's this much we're on the edge, we're on the forefront, the frontier of getting this more mainstream, which, given that the VA continues to recite 22 veterans a day, Doc, the number may be much higher than that. Yeah. We know it's a much higher level of incidence of suicide in the military population than the civilian side. But if they're really interested in addressing and reducing that number, these are the things I would think they would embrace and bring in and say, let's make this happen. You mentioned the VAs participating in a couple different places. Where do you see that by the end of this year? Do you see any positive movement?
Yeah, the other thing that happened just December 23rd of last year, the National Defense Authorization Act was passed, and that included a bill that was pushed through by Representative Dan Crenshaw and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, reaching out across the aisle from left to right, pushing through that they're going to fund MDMA-assisted therapy for active duty service members in the Department of Defense as well as in the VA. Now, what exactly that will look like, everybody's waiting to see. But it's already been signed by the president. This is going to happen. What exactly that is going to be, I don't know yet. I would absolutely love to, put my shoulder to the grindstone on that and participate at whatever level, like Starship Troopers. I'm doing my part. I just want to do my part.
And if somebody wants to encourage their legislative representative to tap you on the shoulder and get involved, they could certainly do that. Specifically, the National Defense Authorization Act approved this. So there's funding set aside. It's already been appropriated. So now it's the push to get the team together. I'd love to see you on the team. How can somebody have an impact in that regard? Do you know?
I don't even have any idea. At this point, it's just so fresh that everybody's kind of waiting to hear what the next steps are going to be and what exactly that'll look like. I know one of the chief psychiatrists at Walter Reed, I'm blanking on his name right now, also has the same training that I have, and I imagine he'll be the tip of the spear around a bunch of those sorts of things.
Okay, excellent. Everybody, we've been talking to Doc Askins. He's been gracious to share some time with us and enlighten you, our audience, on the fact that there are some positive changes on the horizon regarding treatment for some of the anxiety disorders, namely PTSD. Does this work for somebody that has the diagnosis of major depressive disorder?
So the studies around major depressive disorder have focused a lot more on psilocybin and comparing them to SSRIs, psilocybin being the active component of what are called magic mushrooms. If you buy into the aging theory of DNA, it was about 6 million years ago that human beings separated from fungi on the old family tree. So there's still mushrooms that grow with serotonin in them, and psilocybin acts on serotonin receptors inside our brains. And I don't know what any of that stuff means. The world's a big mystery to me. Like, I got more degrees than Fahrenheit, and I'm realizing more and more how little I know what's going on out here, right? But psilocybin is part of magic mushrooms, and it's especially Johns Hopkins has been doing research under the recently passed Dr. Roland Griffiths has just published, an entire corpus of literature around psychedelic assisted therapy. And it seems that psilocybin especially may have some utility in treating depression. Again, psilocybin, Schedule 1 medicine for they've got some, exceptions made for running some clinical trials, but what the future of that looks like, everybody's kind of holding their breath to see if MDMA crosses the finish line, and hopefully that creates a pathway for other psychedelic molecules of all sorts to acquire FDA approval as well for various approaches to psychedelic assisted therapy.
Well, I know you in your profession would be able to help. You'd be able to reach more people with positive ways to deal with some of their psychoses. I so appreciate your time. This has been Doc Askins sharing his time with you. You can understand, number one, he's humble. Number two, he's very well versed in a whole bunch of different ways. And he's been there and done that if you're a military member. If you're not, and you think that your loved one, whether it's your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad, your husband, might benefit from this, website again?
You can find my clinical website at advancedpracticeproviders.com, and then my author page is antiheroesjourney.com.
And that's where you'll find the book also, antiheroesjourney.com. You got to get to know this man better. I hope we've opened the door for some of you to investigate everything that he is pushing forward to try and help you and your loved ones. Doc, thank you again so much for spending time, and I pray that you'll come back and brief us on some happenings in the future.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Everybody, it's Garen Cohn for American Warrior Radio Show. Please subscribe. It's the only way nobody's making a paycheck here. This is about sharing good information to positively impact past and present military members and their families. Until then, don't forget, thank a vet. Hi everyone, it's Garen Cohn with American Warrior Radio. I'm here with my good friend Christian. We're here to deliver a very important message about a crisis in our land.
Suicide prevention, more specifically, veteran suicide prevention.
22 a day are taking their own lives. This must stop. This can't continue. If you or someone you know is contemplating suicide, please know that God has tomorrow planned for you. Don't take your own life. And just remember, suicide is a permanent solution
to a temporary problem.